leave it on this side.
I thought that was the beginning.
Okay.
There, is that on the beginning?
You're on the second slide.
I am?
Mm-hmm.
It shows my screen as the home slide, so that's a problem. So let me see what I'm doing. Can you see it now? Dana?
No, no.
I'm having trouble with the sharing then. Give me a second.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining. Just give us 1 second to help with some technical difficulties.
Okay, Dana, check now. Is this the first slide?
No, you're on the second slide.
That's the second slide now?
Yes.
Too?
Yes.
Third?
Why don't you go ahead and reshare, and I think we'll get it.
Okay. There we go. See it okay?
Great. Yes.
Great. Okay. Good morning, all. We're going to wait just another minute, and then we will get started. All right. Good morning and welcome to this morning's webinar as part of the Adapt and Adopt series. My name is Melissa Lautenschlager and I'm joined by Dana Moyer as our co-host. We both work in the Division of Instructional Materials and Implementation. We do have some additional TEA members joining us to support with answering questions throughout, and then we'll have a specific Q&A session at the end. Sorry. So today, I want to remind everybody before we get started that you can find the recordings of the webinar on the Strong Start page on TEA's website. So we'll post all recordings and slides later today so that you have access to this ones along with the other slides and presentations from this series. If you are looking to get up-to-date information on Texas Learning, this will also be posted on TEA's texasHomeLearning.org website. Please make sure to use the Q&A feature to ask questions for us to answer later, and reserve the chat for only immediate needs so that we're able to record questions.
Melissa, pause for 1 second. Can you repin the interpreter?
I can.
The interpreter is not shown.
Great. Let me see what I could do. Hold one technical difficulty. Hold one moment. Dana, can you see now that Gina is present, our interpreter?
Okay. I can see our interpreter and I will double check with the participant.
Great, thank you so much. Sorry for the pause. During our series, this is part of a series of the Adapt and Adopt series. We are in Module 6, Implementing Texas Home Learning, which we'll specifically be going over that today. Our objectives for our time this morning are to acknowledge how today's reality may impact adoption and use of instructional materials, explore how Texas Home Learning 3.0 may meet needs based on district situation, and then understand next steps to exploring adoption. And we will review some case studies. So before we get started, we want to jump into exploring and discussing today's reality. Our current reality makes it necessary for us to continuously be creative and iterative in our processes of what we are planning for. We are finding different information as soon as it is available regarding the health situation, and having to make quick pivots in what is usually a long drawn out planning process for all districts to get ready for the new school year. This is challenging now because of the current reality in which our students have limited access to remote learning platforms and to their teachers. We need to be able to, we have an increase of inequity and be able to solve for that. There's a decrease of teacher oversight and support in this remote environment, and therefore we're having to think through solutions for how to stay connected with our students. Our teachers have a significant workload increase for creating and adapting materials to solve for situations. There's significant changes to school schedules and time with students. And then the adjustments to our instructional approach to support remote learning really has to be considered. All throughout this, we know that people are making quick decisions and trying to use the most current information to be able to make their plans as robust, detailed, and responsive as possible.
Melissa, I'm going to have to pause you for a second. We're still having trouble getting the interpreter on the screen.
Okay. One moment, please. I'm so sorry. Can we now see our interpreter pinned on the screen? Gina says she can see, but wondering from others. Okay. Dana, I'm going to ask you if you could possibly share your screen. It might have something to do with my sharing.
I think we've got it now. If you go back to sharing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you now see Gina? Okay, wonderful. Again, our apologies. We're trying to make sure that we have the right supports in our webinar today. I appreciate your patience as we work through the technology. So returning to the essential questions that we have during our current situation is, how do we make sure all of my students experience high quality, TEKS-aligned instruction regardless of their learning environment, level of connectivity, and many other considerations? So how do I accomplish that without seeing all or some of my students in person every day? We rely as educators on being able to pick up on our students' mood, attention, because we're able to experience them in our classrooms. And now having to have this virtual environment creates some additional challenges of staying connected to our students and understanding their learning needs. The challenges are hard today because of some of the limitations. Instructional materials were not originally created to meet the needs of this new reality. Although many vendors are working diligently to rise to the occasion and support their users as quickly as possible, there are still some gaps in what materials are able to provide because they were not intended to be used in this virtual environment. Leaders are dealing with continuous changing health and safety considerations. And so what may be true today might change tomorrow, and they may have an excellent plan for a start for remote learning and when kids return, but the challenges of what faces with an ever-evolving health situation can be difficult. And then lastly, there is limited time, resources, and money to build and or buy new solutions. And so therefore, what can be available to support this ever increasing, changing environment and needs? We must adjust how we support students and teachers. So given our limitations, we need to become more flexible in how solutions are identified and implemented. And we need to lead to adjustments that make sense today, but would not have been ideal in normal operating situations. So we would not in August be considering adopting a new curriculum at this point, but we are in a different time. So example of potential adjustments is switching from one school model to another to address safety, changing the school schedule mid-year based on staffing changes, student needs, adopting new curriculum or obtaining additional resources in this expedited French timeframe, and then changes in communication approach to teachers to support this change management. Specific adjustments in the decision to adapt and adopt are challenging now. So new materials are being created real time to address today's needs. And in the summer of 2020, districts determined this could be the situation where you determine that adapting materials is best for the current planning because you don't have an option to adopt right immediately when school starts. But this is not, the materials that you're adapting are still not ideal given required time and resources. So districts may throughout this fall be continuing to revisit this idea of, do we adopt? So we see that districts may start the year with their best laid plans and their adapted materials and may decide that based on results, they may need to adopt mid-year because new solutions become available that better meet teacher and student needs. This is unlike a typical adoption process where you are being iterative throughout the year to help find better solutions as they become available. We're going to jump into exploring Texas home learning as a potential solution for your needs during the current situation. So Texas home learning is a freely accessible optional aligned suite of resources for educators to use in part to support new learning environment. Texas home learning consists of three major components: curriculum with pre-K through 12 digitized standards aligned curricula that have been customized for Texas and the current learning environment. There's a suite of technology tools, including a learning management system to support student engagement and instructional collaboration. And there's professional development to support educators with implementation both in the classroom and in the remote setting. Districts have the option to take part in all of this, none, or components that best meet their needs. The curriculum, the materials that have been digitized resources are intended to be facilitated by teachers and have been customized for Texas and our current situation. We do currently have materials that will be available for pre-K, and pre-K is a systematic solution which contains math, ELA, science and social studies, and is available in Spanish. Then we have K through 12 math, K through 12 English language arts and reading, which also includes foundational skills and phonics. We have Spanish language arts and reading, K through 5th grade, science and social studies, which in addition have Spanish supports for those content areas. Each grade level and subject resource is customized to Texas and includes unit plans, daily lessons, built-in progress monitoring. It is a digital format with printing capabilities, formative and summative unit assessments, teacher, student, and family supports, and provides accessibility supports for all learners. Texas Home Learning is being built to address the current situation and crisis. The THL 3.0 curricular resources are being selected through a competitive solicitation process based on the ability of publishers to develop high quality TEKS aligned instructional materials designed for flexibility in this new environment and accessible to all learners. We've outlined some specifics to this in regards to the demands we are asking of publishers who would participate in Texas Home Learning. None of these are off-the-shelf curriculum. They are being built specifically for the current situation and for Texas schools and students. The curricular resources are going to include the supports that help with different school models, including in-school, asynchronous, and synchronous remote instruction. All of the materials undergo a rigorous review that I'll talk about in just a moment. This is to confirm alignment with the TEKS and quality standards. And throughout the process, we will continue to engage stakeholders. Texas teachers will be involved in the review process before the release of the materials and throughout the year for those interested districts. And we will have a continuous improvement plan and action that can be made to the materials informed by the feedback of our Texas teachers and other stakeholders. The review process is extensive that I just want to share just a few of the criteria. Each lesson is being individually reviewed along with every associated component, the student materials, any manipulatives or additional resources, text components, and this is happening at the lesson level to ensure TEKS alignment, make sure that it's adaptive to remote learning. We're looking for sensitivity and awareness of course errors and accuracy, specific lesson quality best practices, supports for all learners, the digital tools, and the embedded lesson assessments. We are also looking at the unit level review to look at the holistic unit to ensure that there is a quality of a unit plan, there is true TEKS and ELPS alignment, looking through important practices that are associated with the content, that there is sufficient progress monitoring, supports for all learners, implementation supports that will help teachers to make decisions about how best to use the materials in the various teaching environments and models. We will have an extensive review of the assessment to make sure that it is TEKS aligned, that it's adaptive to a remote learning environment, and of course, error sensitivity and making sure that it has a strong assessment design and support for all learners. And then at the very end, the course level review is that once all units are reviewed, the full set of materials will be reviewed once again to ensure that the standards are covered and required improvements occur across all units for a better iteration the following year. As you're thinking about this option of Texas Home Learning, there's a spectrum of available resources. You can have you already have in your district high access to materials and you are not needing to have an adoption. You're going to use your existing materials and therefore maybe you're not going to use the curriculum. You could instead decide to use the LMS, that is Schoology. You could decide to do a partial adoption where you look at adopting a specific grade band or subject area. where you have limited resources and need additional support. Or you could decide to adopt all of the available components of 3.0 to support your district need. Through your potential paths forwards, if you're planning to use the THL resources, you may want to consider this mid-year partial or full adoption. So you're going to need to conduct expedited reviews of specific products throughout the year to determine if they enhance ability to meet your teachers' and student needs. You need to provide teachers with access to the resources and have them review when available to encourage the use of the resources and selection if it best meets the needs of the district. I'm going to jump into the next steps for adoption, where Dana's going to take over and help discuss.
Thanks, Melissa. And again, we know that this is not a normal adoption process and that this is not a typical time period under which you would be working to make these important decisions. But we know some things that are true about any adoption, that to successfully adopt and implement products in a new environment, you got to consider things a little bit differently. One would be starting with change management, engaging teachers and administrators in this process and preparing them for the new reality of mid-year adjustments as circumstances change within your local context. Start by discussing how to redesign processes to allow for a rapid cycle review and adoption, and use existing resources when available. So as an example, we have the Texas Resource Review quality rubrics, which can help your team determine the quality of the materials for yourselves. Of course, engage teachers meaningfully in the process. Have them thinking about what worked well in the spring and what they want to improve on this year, and through an iterative process of improvement. Ensure any product under consideration directly meets the needs of your teachers and your students. Also think about identifying solutions with the local school boards. Determine if your local board provides a crisis waiver for adoption, and if board approval is necessary as you're planning to use an additional product as an additive resource, and explore off-cycle board approval if it's required in your local context. And we know that the best resources are best used with supporting tools and implementation. So invest in implementation, plan ahead for implementation support should teachers recommend a mid-year adoption and a switch to Texas Home Learning. Invest in training, coaching, and monitoring to help teachers implement the product with fidelity. There are some specific things to prepare for when considering adoption for Texas Home Learning that we wanted to call out and name, again, because we're in a different situation than we normally are with curricular adoptions. So Texas Home Learning 3.0 units are being improved real time to meet the needs of remote learning. So they will be reviewed and released one unit at a time. Adoption teams should plan for this when reviewing the product. Also, TEA is reviewing the product for quality and obtaining teacher input prior to release. So districts can leverage this upfront work to support their local adoption. Digital versions of materials will be freely available. However, districts should plan time for the purchase and distribution of printed materials and underlying text if you're leveraging printed materials for either your in-person or your remote option. Districts may plan to leverage education service centers for Texas Home Learning implementation support.
Thanks, Dana. I'm going to talk a little bit about different options, and then Dana will start to talk about the case studies. So there are specific approaches that your district may choose to do to adopt THL, and they may be different based on your unique scenario. So we're giving a couple of examples here. So in District A, you're wanting to do a rapid adoption and launch. This means that you want to plan to conduct a rapid cycle adoption an immediate launch as soon as the Texas Home Learning materials are available. Through this, you're going to complete a rapid adoption review and begin to prepare teachers in August. This can happen with some upfront planning that can be put in place as soon as the materials are available. You may also consider preparing bridge materials for students during the first week of school, with plans to launch THL in the classroom in September and October. This will provide an opportunity to bring students back in and to onboard teachers for the use of these new materials. Another option could be that District B wants to adopt mid-year. They're planning to adapt existing materials, but are considering a transition mid-year. So you've already put together extensive plans and made adaptations to your materials to prepare for the start of the year. You're going to then launch with those adapted materials while simultaneously reviewing the Texas Home Learning. This would happen if you were thinking that the materials, you had great plans going in, but maybe had concerns in some areas or with some components, like how to have truly asynchronous learning plans and materials available for your students, but you have effective synchronous and in-person plans set up. If this is true, you would be creating a plan to transition from adapted materials to Texas Home Learning mid-year so that you can ensure continuity of learning and plan for the effective switch when you are ready to make the change. Districts may provide a bridge, here's an example of how District A could use a rapid cycle adoption and launch. So you would review the THL materials as soon as they're released, prepare bridge materials for the early weeks of school, and then launch into Texas Home Learning in September. In October and November, you're continuing the implementation support by leveraging Texas Home Learning and ESC implementation supports to help provide training and additional coaching. In December, there's a reflection and continuous improvement where you're reflecting on the effectiveness of materials to identify specific areas in which more support, coaching, or training is needed, and throughout the rest of the year, ongoing support. Districts may want to think about this idea of bridging from the start of school to the launch of THL. Given that THL is not yet available, although you may want to take on the use of, you would want to be able to also think through, how you would use the bridging part of this to launch and re-engage students by highlighting small glimpses of what's to come, focusing throughout this time, of course, on student health and wellness. The bridge opportunity allows you to re-engage, help students see what's to come, onboard them to the tools and methods they will experience, diagnose areas of unfinished learning from the prior grade level, and then allow time for practice with the tools and other students' interaction remotely. This provides an opportunity to slow down and help students prepare and launch to immediately begin learning with their new materials. I'm now going to turn it over to Dana. Oh, I'm going to look quickly, sorry about that, the District B mid-year adoption idea. In this case, students would start the school year as normal with the adapted materials and consider what are the areas that may still have gaps to look through THL3. If you're doing mid-year, you're then going to launch these adapted materials while simultaneously reviewing and planning for a transition to the THL materials that you believe would be most effective for your district. In October and November, you're going to plan with THL and engage the ESCs as well as THL supports to prepare teachers and schools for the transition. And then in December, you're planning for the THL for that mid-year launch to start immediately in January. You will continue to revise your transition plan and use your THL materials throughout the rest of the year with continued implementation support from THL and the ESCs. I'm going to turn it over to Dana to talk through specific case studies looking at some of these examples that we shared about an initial launch and a mid-year launch.
So the first district we're thinking about, we'll call District A. That's thinking about a rapid adoption and launch. And if you could go to the next screen, Melissa. District A needs to think about instructional materials differently than before, but they're not starting with a baseline. We've all had some experience with distance learning of some kind in the spring that may inform our approach if we have a distance option this fall or some uncertain options. District A reflected on their experience in the spring and considered how effective their adopted curricula were for remote instruction. Teachers reviewed the Texas Home Learning materials when available to see their usability and suitability for their needs, and they considered how those materials would translate to the school models that they will be implementing. And for content areas, leveraging Texas Home Learning, how they can strategically bridge instructional time prior to the release of Texas Home Learning. So in that reflection on the spring, the district found that its RLA materials, its reading language arts materials, transferred well to remote learning because the books were already available digitally, and they spent some of the summer planning for access to printed texts for home use. They had also just adopted reading language arts materials in the most recent adoption, and teachers' experiences have been mostly positive. However, their current math materials did not have strong at-home components, and math teachers found themselves spending several hours per week trying to adapt for remote learning. Therefore, District A decided to prioritize adoption of new materials for math. And Melissa, you could go ahead and click. Given the additional challenges with a late adoption, they wanted to prioritize staff capacity towards the implementation and use of math materials. They engaged ESC support for math as well. Since Texas Home Learning materials are built to support continuity of learning between home and school, the math curriculum would fit well with their hybrid school model and the blended learning that they've already started to do in math. Students will be at school in this hypothetical district for 2 days, then home for 2 days. And with Texas Home Learning Math, they will be able to continue learning in a similar format in those 2 different settings as they implement a blended learning model in school and a hybrid model between school and home. Given these decisions, District A was left with determining how to best use instructional time at the beginning of the school year to begin driving towards grade level mastery and student success prior to the release of Texas Home Learning materials, which we know is not on an ideal timeline. However, District A decided to dedicate the first several weeks, about 6 weeks of the school year, to to adapting its current materials and setting a mathematics culture, working on solving word problems and other math tasks that will help teachers understand where student gaps are. They practice sharing strategies and engaging in a culture of mathematical discourse, virtually or in person, again, with their adapted current materials that the district worked to adapt. This prepared them to engage with Texas Home Learning, which they wanted to rapidly adopt and begin using as soon as possible. And for this district, a partial adoption of Texas Home Learning as soon as it's available, with a particular focus on math, will best meet their local needs.
For District B, they're looking more at this mid-year adoption, and District B wants to take a little more time for teachers, parents, and leaders to review the Texas Home Learning materials when they are available and prepare teachers to use them. They struggled significantly with materials in all content areas during the distance learning in the spring, but had the most significant challenges with adapting their pre-kindergarten materials for remote learning. Given that the adoption of new pre-kindergarten materials for Proclamation 2021 is very soon, their current materials are several years old and were not built to support distance learning. They are open to adopting new materials in all grade levels and content areas if they will better meet their current needs, but are most interested in and feeling urgent about a better option for pre-kindergarten. District B decides that it is going to adapt their current materials for the first few months of the school year because that is what they have been planning for, and they will plan for a mid-year adoption. Although they may adopt pre-K materials sooner based on teacher review, input, and needs. District B is starting the school year remotely and has many families that have selected to continue with a remote option and asynchronous learning beyond the beginning of the school year. They plan to reset remote learning option mid-year in order to continuously improve and strengthen. Again, they will adapt their materials for the first half of the year and support a strong mid-year adoption. They may adjust this plan for pre-K as needed and as materials are available and reviewed to have a sooner adoption and transition. This mid-year adoption of Texas Home Learning will best meet the local needs and allow time for change management in the district. Dana and I have shared some different options that can be considered of how to take in Texas Home Learning to meet the needs of your district and given some specific case studies. We now would like to pause and provide an opportunity for you to ask questions and for us to try to answer. I will share that our team is here to help as much as possible, but we may not be able to answer all questions during this time. So I'm going to pause and begin to read some of the questions, and my team can jump in.
Hey, Melissa, while you are reading through, just a couple of questions that I want to call out. One is whether or not there will be a pre-K option that's included in Texas Home Learning 3.0 curriculum. And I guess I'll provide color on that question, Melissa or Dana, but chime in if you have more. But we are currently evaluating, as Melissa said, kindergarten through fifth grade for social studies, science, and SLAR materials, and then K-12 for an addition for ELAR and for math. And then we are currently also evaluating. It's a part of our active solicitation pre-K materials.
Yeah, And just to add to that, I know there's some wondering about secondary science and social studies with questions about expanding. We are continuing to look at and discuss options for additional content to be added to Texas Home Learning. There's a question, is pre-K aligned with Frog Street? The pre-K curriculum we are working with a specific publisher, and therefore when we release that, we'll be able to share more information, but it is a publisher's curriculum that has been specifically designed for Texas and the remote learning situation.
We're getting several questions on wanting to see samples of the curriculum, and as soon as we can announce the curriculum, we're planning to very quickly be able to provide overviews and introductions to those curricular materials. We know people are eager to see samples, and so we encourage you in a moment after the questions, we'll provide a survey where you can sign up to get the most up-to-date information as soon as we're able to release it so that you can see those materials.
There's some questions about who's making the lessons and when and how will we see the materials released. We are working diligently to get the materials released as soon as possible. The publishers that we are procuring materials from are making the lessons and developing the curriculum and instructional components as aligned to the requirements that we have set forward and shared with you during this webinar.
We do also want to acknowledge that the timeline isn't ideal. This situation isn't ideal. It's unprecedented, and it calls for an unprecedented response. We're currently in an active solicitation to procure these resources, and we understand that's a ton of difficulty on you all, and your teachers and your students. We do want to make sure that we are being active stewards of taxpayer money, and we need to fulfill those obligations in the contracting process, and then make sure that we're also diligent, rigorous, and smart about the review process of the content that folks are developing, that our publishers will be developing. So we will be releasing that content soon. Soon is an answer I do not like to get, and it's an answer I do not like to give either. But we will be communicating with you all as soon as we can get a definitive timeline in your hands.
Got a question about, do you need to adopt Texas Home Learning in order to use it? And so I just want to clarify that, you know, the use of curricular materials as always is a local decision. So as a district, you could decide to formally adopt in Texas Home Learning. You could decide to make it a resource that's available to your teachers since it will be openly available. But again, the way to adopt and the decisions around adopting curriculum is a local decision.
There's a lot of questions associated with, do you have to use Schoology to be able to use the instructional materials and specific content? No. You can actually bring these into your own LMS or other systems. So it's not a requirement that you also use Schoology. If you already use things like Google Classroom, you can use this in association with that. The intention here is to provide as many options as possible. Again, I see a lot of questions and concerns about the timeline. Understandable, and wanted to provide some additional thoughts on how to bridge from not having the resources right now in your hands to still be able to plan to use if that is what you need. We are looking to provide supports and work directly with ESC staff to have them as well, and they are invested and supportive to work with districts on what's the best selection options, as well as how to support you in the use of THL3 once you've made that decision.
Got a question about what students will be able to do virtually with Texas Home Learning and whether the resources will provide instruction and assessment virtually. So one of the considerations in Texas Home Learning materials and selecting was to make sure that they could be used in this environment across school models, in-person, remote, and hybrid, and in particular that challenge of students coming to school and then being back home and the back and forth. So every curriculum that's part of Texas Home Learning does include some remote virtual components and some printable components as we continue to work on connectivity and access.
I had several people in the questions ask about access to the slides and the recordings. So I put up on the screen how you can find the webinars and where more information. This will include the slides as well. And there's a question about how will we know when materials are released, or can we see them immediately? We have created a survey for people to fill out, in which you can ask to be updated on content specific, and we can reach out directly, as well as if you're interested in being part of those teacher groups.
Melissa, in addition, I just posted in the chat to all attendees the webpage for these webinars. So not only will it have this adopt webinar, but it will have the rest of them recordings from them over the course of the past 2 weeks. A couple other questions about the publishers. Unfortunately, given that this is an active solicitation, we can't release any information until contracts are signed. So again, understand that that's not ideal, but in line with state procurement laws that we need to follow.
And I just posted the link in the chat to the survey. We greatly encourage you to take the survey. You can sign up for content specific updates if you'd like to just know more about when pre-K is released or when SLAR is released or whatever you're interested in. Please take a moment to take that survey. It's very quick, and then we can keep you up to date.
I do see some questions about like involving the quality criteria that's specific to the content. We gave you an overview of what's being reviewed, but everything is tailored to very content specific. And so for pre-kindergarten, we are looking at criteria aligned to the pre-kindergarten guidelines to ensure that the materials best meet the needs for pre-kindergarten.
We got some more questions about launch of the materials. One question is about scope and sequence and units. We recognize it's not helpful to just give a lesson and want to make sure that when we do deliver these materials to you all, it is a part of a broader scope and sequence, part of a unit, and those lessons and the individual, the sequences or packages of lessons, if you will, are a part of a broader unit. So that's something that we'll be releasing along with the first release of the instructional materials.
Got a question about the cost to adopt. And again, Texas Home Learning is freely available. The only cost that you should anticipate is if you're printing materials for use. But access to Texas Home Learning, including the LMS, is free, and you should anticipate a cost of texts if there are texts, for example, for the ELAR or SLAR options. So text, printing, everything else is freely available.
Oh, go ahead, Andrew.
Okay, well, so we're getting some great questions, I believe, from a lot of ESC folks that are on the call about Schoology and actually getting access to it, because you want to know what you're helping districts with, which makes a ton of sense. So our team is actively engaged with Schoology, and we will be providing licenses to ESCs to use Schoology and to learn about Schoology. In addition to those licenses, we'll also have training specific to ESCs and a point of contact for y'all to reach out to their team to make sure you get your questions answered that inevitably districts across Texas are asking you all right now.
There's some questions about the requirements if you choose to use THL. There aren't requirements. This is entirely an option for how districts use which content. You're not required to have a specific school model. It really is intended to be an option to support during this situation, to provide districts with additional supports. Questions about like the pre-K adoption. Districts may select things on the state adoption list or any adopted or any materials. The intention for all products that will be part of Texas Home Learning is that once materials are complete, they will also go through an extensive quality review through the Texas Resource Review as well. But if you like the product for pre-K and Texas Home Learning and want to use that, then you certainly can adopt that for your pre-K materials. Again, your decision to adopt pre-K materials does not have to occur as soon as the state adoption list comes out in November. Schools may adopt curriculum and materials on their own timeline. It's a matter of making decisions about allotment and ensuring that you are looking through what would be next and implications of moving that forward are a district decision. There are some questions about accessibility. So everything that is on Texas Home Learning will ensure the digital requirements of 508 accessibility. We are also looking into supports additionally, and the LMS provides additional access supports for students, as well as we'll be providing more information on the explicit pieces and access components for each of the materials as soon as we're able to release those.
We're getting some comments that the survey is actually not allowing some folks to submit. We're going to go back into our Qualtrics system and fix whatever issue that is. Melissa or Dana, do we have a way to connect with these folks to make sure that we get them the survey?
If they put in their registration,
yeah,
we can connect with you directly there and we'll send out the survey. You also can contact us at texashomeLearning@tea.texas.gov. And Andrew and I will make sure that we get the information to you.
The survey should be working correctly as long as if you are an ESC staff member, if you select that first and then your region, it should be working correctly. And again, quick survey, and it will help us. It will help us know more information about who's interested and keep you up to date on information. So again, really encourage you to answer that survey.
We will be sending out additional updates on where and how to access THL materials. You do not have to use Schoology to do so, and we'll be providing additional updates on how to access those as soon as we're able.
Got a question about paper lessons and how Texas Home Learning is similar, 3.0 is similar or different from 1.0 and 2.0. In 1.0 and 2.0, we did have the option to print and ship directly to homes as part of the crisis response for 1.0 and 2.0. But for 3.0, again, the materials are freely available, but printing and if you were planning to ship materials to families, that would all be a local decision and local cost for the printing and again, any text associated with the products.
Two things I placed in the chat. One is Dana and my names in case you needed those. And then also the email address for Texas Home Learning. If you would like to send additional questions, please let us know. Looking over just a few.
Getting some good responses on that survey. It looks like that fix worked. So thanks y'all that sent along that solution. Another question that as we wrap up here, another question that we've gotten a couple times just about the LMS, about Schoology. One question about so I think there's a handful of questions about will Texas Home Learning work with X, Y, or Z? And specific to that learning management system, think of the learning management system as pulling in your instructional tools, pulling in your grade book, your other student information systems that you have, parent collaboration, communication, teacher collaboration, and communication. So with Microsoft, it does have a plugin. It's kind of like an app store. So they will have a Microsoft plugin. They do have a Google Classroom plugin. And then the following question that we got is the content of Texas Home Learning only available via Schoology? How could we import it into Canvas? Texas Home Learning content will not only be available via Schoology. You have three options. One is pulling that content directly off Schoology. So that's an option. The second is plugging that content into whatever LMS that you have and that you like and that you're using. And the third option is just using it native. So pulling the content directly from the publishers. Another good question about Schoology about training. There is onboarding support available. There's a training embedded in what we paid for. In addition to that, in addition to providing the licenses for ESCs that we've worked with the Schoology team to deliver, we'll also be providing training and support to ESCs for all the questions that y'all are getting about Schoology.
As we wrap up here, we realize that not all questions have been responded to. We will do our best to continue to answer those questions after the webinar. If you would like to contact us directly at Texas Home Learning at tea.texas.gov, we'll continue to respond to your questions there as well. I want to thank you for your time, participation, and the amazing job you're doing to support the planning and support for students in this very challenging situation. I am a parent, so I thank you as a parent as well, and I'm married to a teacher and understand the complex nature of what you're going through. Greatly appreciate it. Hope that we can help to provide some options that support your work. And again, thank you for attending today, and continue to contact us and reach out with your questions. Thank you and have a great day.
Thank you.